Everyone, so next is the lesson 3, the collecting, marking, tagging, and preserving evidence. So in the collecting, tagging, and preserving evidence, in this process of investigation, the responding team should be knowledgeable on the proper actions to be done on specific kinds of evidence found in the scene of the crime. So in short, being an investigator or in a investigation, you must be knowledgeable or dapat kabalo ka on the proper actions or the proper method on how to collect, to mark, to tag, and preserve some evidence. So, there are collecting physical evidence. So, in collecting physical evidence, all items that were found in the crime scene should be collected. So, in short, tanan makita sa crime scene or tanan makita sa palibot sa crime scene must be collected. So the collecting officer should not decide whether a certain item is relevant or irrelevant. As a officer, you must be responsible of taking those item na appeal sa crime scene. So one of a classified evidence is the blood. So blood is a bodily fluid. So it is a important evidence in homicide, assault, robberies, or other cases that it may be spilled to the crime scene. So a blood is categorized into major groups. So the type A, the type B, the type AB, and the type O. So there are collections, ways of collecting the blood, which is the collection of a liquid blood. So in collection of a liquid blood, you must use clean, disposable pipette or eyedropper for sample collected. You will also place in a sample in a container, and if the amount of blood is minimal, collection may be put into a sample in a normal saline solution. And you may refrigerate sample in saline solution as soon as possible. You must not mix areas where samples are collected, and above all, avoid contaminating the samples by reusing the collection tools. So next, in a dried blood. So in a dried blood, on observant surfaces, you must bring the entire object or cut out the stained areas and bring to the laboratory. On non-absorbent surfaces, you must scrape up the sample and place it in a container, or if possible, submit it to the entire article. Next is, if sample is scraped from surfaces, you must also scrape the portion of the surface where no blood is present and submit it into the separate container for control in case some substances on the surface causes difficulty in test. So in a collection of blood in our clothing or in a clothing, you must do not fold the cloth, or as it may destroy the stain pattern, or do not package while the stain is still wet, and allow the clothing to dry in a room before packaging. Next, do not expose it to sunlight or high temperature, as they may destroy factors which will determining the blood types. Its evidence is a hair. So a hair, this may be found anywhere in the crime scene because it is often found on the clothing of the victim, neither the suspect, and also who come into physical contact with each other. So for example of this, kanang mag-anay sila buhok, magkumuta na yung buhok, and in instance na malagas ang buhok, matanggal, it may be used as an evidence when it comes to physical contact with the victim and the suspect. And it is very important evidence, especially when it comes to a rape cases. So in a collection of a hair, you must take sample of the head hair from the top. You will use the back on each side of the head. Also, you may take by combining or pulling or cutting close to it in the head. and take at least dozen of hair in each location in the crime scene. Also, take each of these samples should be collected in separate containers and properly labeled. Next is identify hair carefully as to exact location where it is being found. Do not mix hair found in several locations and place the hair in folded paper. Also, do not tape the hair to an object as it will alter the hair and destroy any debris adhering to it. The next is the fingernail scraping, wherein in any cases where physical contact has been made. So, fingernail scraping should be obtained. Ang example of this fingernail scraping is that the victim scratched the suspect in making the assault. Kumbaga, kanang magunitan sa victim ang suspect and malubong ang kamot or ang kuko sa suspect. Mao na siya ang example sa fingernail scraping. So, in collection of a fingernail scraping is that clean each fingernail with a clean fingernail file. Place the scraping or the scraping from each finger on already labeled paper with notion of which finger it came from. Next, place the scraping from each finger in separate envelope or glass vial. And fingernail scraping should be obtained from both victim and the suspect. Also, if the subject hand is contaminated with blood, note this on the container. So, next evidence is a fiber. So, a fiber, it is excellent as tracing evidence when clothing cross-contaminations takes place. This is also important evidence in robbery and hit-and-run cases. So, a fiber, it is an examination of determining whether it is natural or synthetic material. In examining a fiber, you must determine the twist, the number of strands of cloth weave, and also those threads that can be used as a evidence. So in a collection of a fiber, treat and package fibers in the same manner as the hair, and be extremely careful not to cross-contaminate during the collection process. Collect the clothing which is considered to be source of the fibers. Next, do not shake the items as it may dislodge the fibers. So the next evidence is the glass. So a glass, it can be the most important evidence in robbery and also in a hit and run cases. It may be found as tracing evidence also in clothing and also in shoes. So glass is usually examined to determine if both the evidence sample and the known standard has the same physical properties and trace elements as impurities. So a example of this, a glass can be used as evidence like a hit and run cases. Kanang once mabangga ang isa ka tao, then in an instance na mabuak ang salamin or ang side mirror, mao na siya ang kuwaon as a evidence na gamiton sa crime as a evidence para mapakita if unsa jud ang tinuod na hitabo. So in collection of glass, collect from each broken glass at the crime scene. Package them individually in glass vials or envelopes. And while in a hit-and-run cases, collect all broken glasses to ensure the possibility of physical match should fragments be found on suspect's vehicle. So, next evidence is the firearm. So, a firearm, bullet, shotguns, and wad, explosive residue, and gunpowder pattern can provide vital evidence and specific answer to possible questions in the cases. So, ang firearm, mao ni siya ang isa ka evidence na pinaka-importante because once suspect bring a firearm, it could possibly be a big evidence to be used in a court. So, in collection of a firearm, so you must be handled carefully, not only as a safety measure but to avoid disturbing the evidence that may provide. Next is they must use properly marked for latter identification, and never insert anything in the barrel as it may damage and identify the characteristics and dislodge material. So next is that pick up the weapon by the trigger guard and checkered grip so as not to disturb any fingerprints. So next is to record the serial number and the description of the firearm. Firearm with no serial number should be marked with initials on the receiver with no serial number. Never use X or other non-individual type of marking. And do not mark the weapon on an easily removable part such as the stock or the grip. Use discretion so as not to disfigure the weapon. So there are do's and don'ts in collection of firearms. So the don'ts, never submit a loaded gun, never clean the bore, the chamber, or the cylinder before submitting a firearm, and never attempt to fire the gun before it is examined to the laboratory. Next is that never pick up a weapon by placing a pencil or object in the end of the barrel, and you must record the serial number, make, model, and caliber of the weapon, and place the weapon in strong cardboard or wooden boxes. Rifles and shotguns should be taken apart. If blood or any other material which may pertains an investigation is present on the gun, place it on a clean paper around the gun and seal it. And lastly, never contaminate the gun for the examination of the latent fingerprint. So the next evidence is a bullet. So a bullet, it can provide information about the make and type of ammunition and weapon from which the bullet was fired. So evidence as a bullet as a evidence mo ni siya mapakita kung unsa ang klaseng baril na gigamit, whether it is a rifle, a pistol, and it could give big information whether unsa na baril ang gigamit. So in collection of a bullet, handle the bullet so as not to dislodge or extraneous material or damage the marking. If a bullet is lodged in a wood or similar material, cut out the lesion and bring it to the laboratory. Next is to autopsies. At autopsies, request the use of hands or rubber tip forceps to minimize the possibility to damage the bullet. And lastly, wrap each bullet separately in tissue, in cotton, to prevent damage and place it to the container. So next evidence is a cartridge cases. So in a cartridge cases, this can also provide vital information as to the type of weapon used, the type of ammunition, and whether or not the case was fired in specific weapon. So our cartridge cases, it is just the same with a bullet evidence. But in a cartridge cases, you may determine the weapons, the ammunitions, or whether if it is being fired or not. So in collection of a cartridge cases, you must handle it so as not good, as it may not add any scratches or marks. Next is wrap each one separately to prevent damages. Be sure to note specific locations in which is it being found. So next evidence is the seminal stain. So in a seminal stain, it is often but not always found on clothing, blankets, sheets. It is also biological evidence like blood. So in a seminal evidence, you must collect it and allow the stains to air dry, wrap in paper, and package the evidence. For sex offenses cases, the victim should always be examined by a physician, and label or garments such as undershorts, panties, or other exhibits. Package each garment separately. If damp, allow fabric to dry completely before packaging, and also handle fabric as little as possible. So example of the seminal stain is that in a rape cases. So next is the marking of physical evidence. So in marking of physical evidence, as evidence is collected, it is individually marked with initials. In the investigator, initials of the investigator. So, mao ni siya ang pag-mark sa mga evidence na makita sa crime scene. Just like a weapon, like knives, guns, or any materials that being used in a crime. So, as a investigator, they must mark each of evidence that can be seen in the crime scene. So, as investigator, they will use a marking tool. Depends on the nature of the evidence. So it is named as stylus, which is a sharp printed steel. So a stylus, it is mao na siya ang ginagamit sa investigator to mark some evidence that is being used in a crime scene. So there are general rules. In marking tools or object as physical evidence. So as an investigator, they must mark with initials of recovering officer and never use X, and record any serial number if applicable and other distinctive mark. Mark the object without damage, and must always mark the container in which the object is placed, even if object itself is already marked. And also, when tags are used, make corresponding entry in the tags and attach it securely to the objects. So next is a marking of firearms related evidence. So in marking of firearms related evidence, just like in a revolver, mark separately on the barrel, in a frame, in the butt cylinder and stock, and the tape should also be put around the bore in a frame of the gun. So next, in markings of a pistol, mark on the barrel, the frame, the butt, the magazine, the stock, and also the tape must be put around on the gun with the signature of the investigator. Next is a rifle. So in a rifle, mark on the barrel, in the frame, the magazine, the bolt or slides, and all magazine and accessories shall also be marked. And also, as markings of firearms, there is a fired empty shells and misfired cartridge. So in this, you must mark near the mouth of the empty shells, not on the body or the base. Next is the bullets, slugs, balls, pellets. So in markings of this, bullets or slugs can be marked on the ogive or the nose, as well as in the base, not on the body or in the bearing surface. So next is the tagging evidence, wherein all evidence which by their nature could not be marked on each surfaces, such as blood, hairs, fiber, and like are properly stored in a appropriate container. So after which the container is put with a tag. So in this evidence, it is used to link the victims, the suspect, the objects, and also the crime scene. So in a tagging evidence, the container is put with a tag. So a tagging of physical evidence is being done with the use of card wherein the initials of the investigator is being written, the date, the time of the collection, the specific case, and the other information. So there is a preserving of a physical evidence. So in preserving a physical evidence, the perishable materials should be preserved along the way, or the preservation is in the order to reach in the court in the same physical condition as when they were collected from the crime scene. So in short, every evidences, every materials that being used in a crime scene or being seen in a crime scene, kailangan nila i-preserve ug tarong until maabot sa court, and they must preserve kung unsa ang pagkuha nila sa evidence is just the same sa pag-abot sa court. So that is what you call preserving a physical evidence. So in preserving a evidence, the work of a laboratory technician, which is the SOCO teams, they includes the preservation of tool marks, the preservation of the controlled substances and medical preparations, the preservation of question documents, and also the preservation of latent fingerprints. So in preservation of tool marks, whenever possible, submit the whole object containing with a tool marks to the laboratory instead of just removing the areas containing the mark. If this is not possible, carefully remove the areas or carefully photograph and sketch the area containing the mark. Next is that cast of tool marks can be made by a person who has considerable experience in this work. And also pack the objects containing tool marks so that alteration or damage will occur during the shipment. So no alteration or no damage will be occur in the shipment. So next is the preservation of controlled substances and medical preparation. So in preservation of controlled substances and medical preparations, each samples of materials that is being recovered should be placed in a paper container which can be sealed and also be marked. So they must sealed it and mark it, and be sure to properly seal as loose material, particularly in like cases of the marijuana, because it may be cause some spill or leaks that can lost the evidence. So next is the preservation of question documents. So in preservation of question documents, mauna siya ang pag-preserve sa mga questions na ipanghatag, like questions na ipanghatag sa suspect or questions na ipanghatag sa victims. So under no circumstances should be either the question documents or the exemplar be marked. They must deface or altered. No new folds be made, nor should marks or notes be placed on such material. Whenever possible, all documents should be protected or protected by placing them in a cellophane or plastic envelopes. And also shipment of an evidence. Question documents may be submitted personally or left previously described lockers of the laboratory entrance. Such evidence sent to laboratory by mail must be sent by certified or registered mail. So the next is the preservation of latent fingerprint. So in a preservation of latent fingerprint, the primary precaution in all cases is the prevention of adding fingerprint to the evidence. Just like you kanang be careful ka sa mga evidence na imong makita sa crime scene. Nevertheless, never nimo siya gunitan or add some fingerprint because it may destroy those already present na evidence. Next is most fingerprints submitted will be on paper, glass, metal, or other smooth surfaces objects. Next is while gloves or handkerchiefs may be used to pick up such exhibits, latent prints in glass, metal articles, and firearms should be placed on wood or heavy cardboards. Next is that paper and documents containing latent fingerprint should be placed individually in a cellophane or manila envelope. So there are 3 types of fingerprint that can be found in a crime scene. So first is the latent fingerprint, which are made of the sweat and oil on the skin surfaces. So this type of fingerprint is invisible to the naked eye and requires additional processing on order to be seen. So ang latent fingerprint, mauna siya ang fingerprint na once nimo guniton ang isa ka surface, imong fingerprint is invisible. Dili siya dayon makita sa investigator. So ang latent fingerprint, mauna siya ang ginagamit, mauna siya ang kasagaran na mga fingerprint na naa sa like sa mga salamin. Ang process para makita is they will use a basic powder techniques or the use of chemicals. So next is the patent fingerprint. So a patent fingerprint or patent fingerprint can be made by blood, grease, ink, or dirt. So this type of fingerprint is easily visible in human eye. So kalahian siya sa latent fingerprint because ang patent fingerprint easily siya makita sa tao because it can be like example, blood. Nagunitan nimo blood, then dira ni nakagunit ka sa mga other surfaces, so possibly dayon makita imo fingerprint which is visible sa human eye. So next is a plastic fingerprint. So a plastic fingerprint are three-dimension impressions and can be made by pressing your fingers in fresh paint, wax, soap, or tar. So ang plastic fingerprint, naagyapon siya same with the patent fingerprint because it is visible into our eyes. It adds additional processing and also it is has its visibility purposes. So mo na siya ang content sa lesson 3, which is the collecting, marking, tagging, and preserving evidences.